Okay, great. Welcome everyone. My name is Veronica Sullivan. I work with DKS Associates and I'll be a moderator for tonight. Tonight we'll be going over the Meridian Ave Safety Improvements Project. Today we're having a lot of different people talking today, and I want to go over through the Zoom instructions. So on the bottom of your screen, you should see 3 different buttons. At the bottom of the screen, you see a raise hand. As a moderator, I will call on each person to unmute themselves. To see your unmute button will be on the bottom left-hand corner. 3-minute limit will be provided to each commentator and will be enforced to capture as many comments from as many people as possible. But if you speak Spanish, please raise your hand now. My colleague Ilse will provide a Spanish-speaking room. But I would like to know if there's any Spanish-speaking only participants to please click on the raise hand now. Go ahead, Elsa.
Hola, buenas tardes a todos. Si solo hablas en español, por favor, levante la mano ahora.
No? Okay, great. In that case, we won't provide the Spanish-speaking room. However, if there are any Spanish-speaking people, please let me know in the next few minutes. Also at the bottom of your screen, you will see a Q&A box. You can open up this new window and you can click on the questions window and enter any question throughout the entire presentation. And questions will be seen and read by the moderators at the end of the presentation. Any duplicate questions will be answered once, but be kept as part of the record and later shown onto the website. Okay, tonight's agenda. I want to start off with introductions to show off the project team. Right now we have Sarah Keenan, Leif Johansson, Kendra Didinsky. Sarah's internet is not working right now, but I'm going to first introduce Leif Johansson. Go ahead, Leif.
Yeah, hi everybody. I'm Leif Johansson. I am the city's project manager for the Meridian Ave Safety Project. So my role here is to work with our consultant DKS through the design development process, putting our plans and our contract package together, and then ultimately leading the project through construction next summer. Kendra?
All right, and I'm Kendra Didinsky, the city traffic engineer, and I'll be talking a little bit more about the background and just the design as a whole, and we'll remain here to answer any questions you might have. I don't think I can, oh, Sarah is here. Did we want to introduce Sarah at this point?
Sure, Sarah, is your audio working? Sorry for the technical difficulties, no problem. Sarah will join us. She is also part of the DKS team and she has helped with the design portion, but she will definitely be here during the Q&A portion at the end. Okay, after the welcome introductions, we'll go through the presentation, the project background, progress, and public input. Then we provide the project schedule, and then questions and comments will be divided by 1 hour. So we'll take our time. Please provide as many questions as you'd like in the question box. Okay, great. I'll hand it over to Kendra.
All righty, thanks. All right, so the Washtenaw City Safety Grant is sort of the premise of this project, and it funds projects based on collision history and a city's proposal of using proven safety countermeasures to address collision history. There were pedestrian collisions in the time frame for this grant at 163rd and at 170th. So the city's grant proposal included a number of measures to improve pedestrian safety, including crossing improvements specifically at these 2 intersections. There's also been a bicycle collision in this segment of the corridor, and the corridor's long-term plan includes bike facilities, as well as a turn lane to address growing traffic volumes. As such, the project proposal also includes bike lanes and turn lanes at strategic locations for compatibility with long-range plans. Next slide. All right, so as I just talked about on the last slide, based on collision history, the main goal of this grant is to improve safety, particularly for pedestrians. This will be done by improving crossings, including implementation of pedestrian-activated flashing beacons, curb bulb outs, which I'll talk about later in a minute, so don't be confused by that term, but those reduce crossing distances, parking restrictions near intersections to improve sight lines, bike lanes, and strategic turn lanes, which can also help to reduce at-angle and rear-end collisions. The project is not rebuilding sidewalks for the most part, with the exception of bringing curb ramps at the 2 crossing improvements up to ADA standards, which means adding, ADA is accessibility for mobility impaired users. So the project will not be impacting trees or adding a bunch of new pavement necessarily, but will be better organizing movements for each mode of travel and reducing exposure for the most vulnerable roadway users. It's important to understand that this is a grant project, and because of that, our scope and budget are generally limited to these improvements. We're not going to be able to really expand scope beyond what we're showing here today, nor can we really do work outside of the project boundaries. Next slide. All right, and again, we'll have time to talk through questions on these specific details, but getting into the nuts and bolts a little bit of what this project will do. Here we are showing on the left side a typical cross-section of the roadway in its current configuration, which I'm sure most of you are aware of. It has 1 lane in each direction and on-street parking on both sides. And the variations of the configurations we'll be applying as part of the project are shown on the right side of the slide. The first picture on the top shows that on-street parking on one side, 1 lane in each direction, and bike lanes. This is a cross-section that will often be used in between intersections. The second cross-section on the bottom here shows what some intersections could look like, removing all on-street parking in the vicinity of the intersection, implementing on-street bike lanes, a lane in each direction, and a center turn lane. Part of the public outreach process, which Veronica's going to talk about a little bit later, is really seeking your feedback on the application of these 2 cross sections and options as to what area they apply in. We specifically asked for feedback so far on the intersection of 167th, and so far we've heard a preference for the inclusion of turn lanes and removing the parking. But again, Veronica will talk a little bit more about how to provide feedback a bit later. Okay. Moving on to the next slide. So here you see a preliminary overview of the planned cross sections, color coded here in green and red. So for example, the turn lanes are planned at 165th in the southbound direction and 170th in the northbound direction. So that's what that green represents there. The remaining red sections will be the cross section with 1 side of retained on-street parking and no turn lane. I do want to mention that we conducted a parking survey prior to the project development. And although some on-street parking certainly occurs throughout the corridor, it is generally not heavily utilized, and the proposed plan should work to accommodate the on-street parking demand today. Additionally, feedback so far has indicated an interest in some parking removal, given some challenges in terms of sightline concerns at the intersections and making turns to and from those side streets. And then generally speaking too, for the crossings, we want to maintain those sight distance lines to and from crossing pedestrians at intersections. I also want to make sure to explain that this project will eventually tie in seamlessly to the future 175th Meridian project. So that's another project in which LAIF is actually project managing, but between the two, there will be a safe and consistent bike and pedestrian facility that will kind of tie in seamlessly once that project at 175th and Meridian is underway. Next slide. All right, so now looking at the specific details of the 2 crossings proposed for improvements. The plan for 170th and Meridian is to add a center median island, which is sometimes called a refuge island, and a central pedestrian activated beacon. It's some additional kind of flashing lights when a pedestrian is about to cross the road on the north leg of the intersection, similar to this photo of 175th near Linden by Shorewood High School. So if you've driven over that way, you might be familiar with this intersection and the refuge median there, as well as the central flashing beacon provided. Next slide. At 163rd, we are planning to install new pedestrian activated rapid flashing beacons, and we will bulb out the corners, which means that the corners will be extended into that parking lane space to reduce crossing distance and exposure, as well as improve sight lines to and from pedestrians. And this really physically blocks folks from being able to park, too close to the crosswalk markings. So that is the application of curb bulbs, sometimes called curb extensions, on that corner where the crossing will be. All right, next slide. Okay, so now that we've gotten through some of the details of the proposed project itself, I wanted to take a minute to explain some of the overarching policies and plans that guide our project design, and really all roadway projects in Shoreline, and also to address some of the high-level feedback we've heard so far. I want to start by plugging our transportation master plan, which is in an update process currently. The link is on this slide and will also be placed in the chat. But the transportation master plan really sets the overarching modal plans, which is to say the sidewalk plan, the bike plan, the vehicle plan, also transit and freight, which guides capital project design, scope, and investment for really the next 20 years or so. It also sets policies for how we prioritize various modal goals. So for example, our complete streets policy and other supportive policies within both the existing and adopted TMP and the draft version intend for bikes to be accommodated on every street in some way, or on most streets, I should say. So we often receive comments about how biking along arterials like Meridian is not safe or appropriate and should instead be accommodated on side streets. I want to just note that while it may be uncomfortable to bike on some arterials right now, our city's goal is really to make bicycling reasonably comfortable on almost every street citywide. Arterials are the backbone of our transportation network, and it's where a lot of the action is, like bus stops, schools, parks, retail destinations, and all of those are places that cyclists are trying to get to and from too. So they really do form a convenient and important network for that access to, rather than diverting those trips off corridor. So the draft criteria for how we are planning to accommodate and approach this need for bicyclists to be comfortable on all roads is called bike level of traffic stress, and it's a notion that's being sort of adopted by multiple cities, region-wide and really nationwide. But the categories here are shown on the right, and you don't need to understand all of this in detail right away. I think the TMP update process would be a great chance to get involved and understand this a little bit better. But in general, what we are saying is with the traffic volume on this corridor, which is currently under 10,000 vehicles per day and has a speed limit now of 30 miles per hour, that a striped bike lane achieves our minimum goal of a level of traffic stress of 2, which represents interested but concerned riders. Generally speaking, that's going to be the broad majority of adults. I also want to mention that there will be in the southbound direction, in some places, a buffered space, so an additional striped width, which can help at least a little bit with that comfort. I understand that currently, if you go out there today, it's hard to imagine bicycling along the volumes of traffic that are out there and kind of in the configuration it is in right now. But our hope is that over time, with modifications like the curb bulbs we're putting in, the recently reduced speed limit, and simply just seeing more bicyclists out there using them, that the actual experience of riding comfortably for most users will be achieved. All right, next slide. Okay, this is the last slide of me rambling on, and then I'll pass it off to somebody else. But I just want to reiterate that this is a grant project. It's fairly confined in its scope. The grants for the Highway Safety Improvement Program, now coined City Safety Program, are relatively modest. Generally, the grants in this $1 million range are typical, and anything beyond that tends to move into something that is not covered under this grant. So I'm just reiterating that we can't fund every concern or address every concern, and particularly not beyond the project's immediate boundaries. And I also just want to make sure that everybody understands we're not trying to widen the pavement. The sidewalks are not changing significantly. And as such, there's really not a big impact to trees or other environmental concerns in that regard. We're really keeping this kind of tightened to the roadway and focused on pedestrian and bicyclist and really vehicle safety as well. With that, I'm going to hand it over.
All right, thanks, Kendra. So just a very high level schedule of where we're at. Currently, we just completed 60% design, so that's actually under review at the city right now. That's been under development this summer, and we'll be sending that back to the consultant to move on towards final completion here. So if everything goes according to plan this winter, we would have a package ready for contractors to bid on, and next summer we could be actually putting this project in the ground or building the project. So it's pretty exciting to move forward. It's been a pretty rapid project, but I think it'll be a good one. It's one that I'm excited about.
Great, thank you so much, Leif and Kendra. I really appreciate it. All right, now I get the fun task to show you about the public input. So I'm going to put something in the chat box. It's called the Shoreline Meridian Ave project website. So if everybody wants to try and put that into their Word or into their Chrome or internet, you'll see that in the Meridian Ave safety improvements, you will see there's a link at the very top to show social pinpoint. The project overview shows like overview of what is going to include the project areas between 175th and 155th Street. You can see the background information, you can see the schedule proposed, hoping everything goes well and we don't hit another pandemic. But yeah, if everything goes well, hoping that next summer we'll have it constructed or begin constructing. And at the very bottom here, there's community demographic information. And this is an optional survey. We're just curious to know what language you're speaking, how did you find out about this particular event, any email address if you're interested in getting in touch with other projects as well. But it just helps us understand who's actually attending the actual events, and you don't have to answer all of them. We just want to know how you found out about this particular event so that we can better promote and reach out to other areas and make sure that this project is reaches out everyone. Okay. We also sent out postcards to a lot of the neighboring areas within the project boundaries. I'm not sure anyone received those postcards, but please let me know if you did receive them in your mailbox. And then, all right, at the very top, what I really want to go over is the social pinpoint site. So if you click on this image here, it will direct you to a new website called Social Pinpoint. Here we'll start off with a lot of instructions, what we'd like to hear your feedback on, and there's a survey as well. It will also show you you can provide in different languages on the bottom, on the top right-hand corner. So if you click on Get Started, and if you want a different language on the top right-hand corner, you can select any of these languages provided by Google, and it will update the language for the entire page. On the top left, you will see the About. It will provide you more instructions, very similar to what you saw on the Welcome page. It also provided activity. And as you can see, we've received over 80 different comments, which is great. It's fantastic. This has been up for about a few weeks, almost to a month about now. And we've received a lot of different ideas and comments and concerns, which is really great. We've used a lot of these for the interim design feedback, and it really helps us understand what people really care about, how we can improve our design. We just want to make sure we direct all the comments into here. So it's a great way for us to immediately direct your feedback into the design. And then there's also Contact Us. You can provide information to project manager, Leif Johansson. And at the very bottom, you will see there's a survey for the 167th intersection survey. We would just like your feedback on what type of configuration you would like for this intersection. Would you like the parking, or would you prefer having a turn lane at this particular intersection while you're approaching it? If you want to click on what your preference is, you can click on option 1 or an option 2, and then click on submit. It would really help us understand where we should direct our design. And to create a comment, this is really fun. You can drag any of these 4 icons. If you have a pedestrian concern, a bike concern, other comments, or something alike, you just click, hold, drag it onto the map, and a new window will pop up. You can say anything you'd like. I love this idea. I have a great idea. I want whatever you'd like to say in the comments, you can. And these are optional. You can say your name, you can add your phone number if you'd like, you can add your zip code, but we just need your email and your comment, and that's about it. You can also attach photos, which is really, really helpful. If there's something that you're thinking like, oh, a particular bike lane, we like this particular bike box or something, you can attach a photo, or this particular sidewalk needs to be updated or something like that. You can just attach a photo so that we know your concerns. And then you click on add comment and it will stick. There you go. Easy peasy. All right, if you have any questions, we can go through it again, but let me know in the questions and comments. I would just like to let you know that this particular website will close on October 1st. So you do have a few weeks to add in your comments before we get to the next stage of design. Okay. Here's a survey question one more time. We want to know what you're thinking, what your preference is for the 167th intersection alternatives. The first option we went through before was maintain the southbound parking lane and 2 through lanes and remove the parking on the east side, Meridian Ave, or add 2 left turn lanes and add a left turn lane and remove parking on both sides. Right, here are the preliminary survey responses so far. Option 2 has been very popular, which is removing the parking lane and having the left turn lane. Okay, great. And if you disagree, please feel free to add it into the survey. Here are the preliminary comments. So far, we have about over 85 comments and 88 survey responses. I just wanted to show that over a quarter is about bicycle concerns, 30% from pedestrian concerns, and then we have 37% of other comments, which is really great. We want to know all your feedback along this particular quarter. And then here's just a word cloud of what common themes: Meridian, traffic, intersection, school, trees, pedestrians. We definitely got a lot of comments saying save the trees, and our design is definitely taking that into consideration. We're not going to remove any trees, which is great. It's a beautiful, beautiful street. And that's about it. Okay. So here we're going to have the questions and comments portion of the presentation. At first, I would like to introduce Sarah Keenan. She got her internet back, which is great. So Sarah, if you want to show your face, say hello to everybody. Go ahead.
Yeah, thank you, Veronica. Sorry, as Veronica mentioned, I was having internet issues at the beginning of the presentation, but happy to be back on. Yeah, thanks so much, everyone, for joining. My name is Sarah Keenan. I'm the project manager on the consultant side, so I've been working very closely with Leif and Kendra and really overseeing the design portion of this. So, I'm really happy we could share it with you tonight and really looking forward to hearing your feedback.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Sarah. So the first question we've received was from Hassan. I apologize if I pronounce your name wrong, but please feel free to click on that raise your hand. Hassan G is, when will the design be finalized and will there be another meeting? Let's let Leif, do you want to respond to that question?
Yeah, sure. So we currently don't have another meeting scheduled, but the design is scheduled to be finalized probably by the end of the year. We're really sprinting to the end because we need to hit the construction season as early as possible to get good bids. So I'll say this December we'll probably be buttoning up and finalizing the design.
Great. Hassan, do you have any other comments or concerns or any other things you'd like to share with us? Any participant now can just raise their hand. I'm going to go and check to see. Great, we have someone raise their hand. All right, Hassan, can you unmute? And perfect, go ahead.
Hello.
Hi.
Yep. So that question, thank you all so much for doing this, first of all. I really appreciate it. I guess the question is more so people aren't caught off guard if the design changes drastically, because right now it does look like on-street parking is a consideration.
Was that your question? Go ahead.
I can probably tackle that one. So it's unlikely, I would say, that the design would change drastically. It's possible, as we discussed, that one of the intersections we might opt for a turn lane as opposed to retaining on-street parking, for example. I would supplement Leif's answer with the fact that when and this applies generally to city contracts, but when we finalize our design, we generally have to go in front of city council to get the contract approved. And that can really be an opportunity for information and feedback as well. And so if we found that, we got to the end of the design process and there was, really some serious concerns from the community, that would probably be a good opportunity to address those before we really take any further steps. That has happened in the past with, some contentious projects where we really use that council meeting as another public feedback opportunity and a chance to address any remaining lingering concerns. Does that help answer your question?
That does. I really appreciate that. And I have a comment also about on-street parking. I think there might be a misconception that, larger houses have more cars and so they need more on-street parking. But actually, if you go up and down Meridian in the evening, you'll notice that it's actually the smaller houses who usually only have like 2 cars, but they don't have the space. And so if on-street parking is completely removed, it adds more of a burden for, likely those who are have houses that are lower priced than others.
Sure, that's a very fair point, and I really appreciate that. I think in general, equity is extremely important to the city of Shoreline, and I was just listening to NPR last week and heard a really interesting report about, lower income folks, and not assuming that folks with smaller homes are lower income per se, but that is an important element. I live in a very small house, so, but just noting that we don't want to kind of unduly burden any one resident in Shoreline. And so I think the opportunity would be to reach out directly to the project manager that's on the website or at any of the other, methods of contacting us to tell us specifically what your concern is about your on-street parking kind of tied to your house. And we can work with you to address that in one way or another. I can't commit that we'll always be able to address every single concern, but we'll at least take a good look at that and try to work through solutions.
Awesome, thank you. I really appreciate that. Yeah, and it looks perfect right now. I'm just afraid if the plan changes.
Yeah, appreciate that. Thanks.
Great. Thank you so much for your comments. All right, I'm going to send it off to Dennis and Gidget T. Go right ahead. Can you unmute yourself?
Okay, go ahead.
Thank you. The presentation has been very interesting, but I'm just curious, do you have some kind of estimated time frame when we can expect delays because of construction? Do you have any idea?
That is a tough question at this point. I think we're gonna get this going as soon as possible. I would say probably late spring would be the earliest. And then certainly we have to have the paint down before snow comes in 2023. But I think the goal is to expedite this and get this done, maybe early in summer next year, thereabouts. But yeah, there's no way I could identify like a month of next spring, summer to commit to at this point. It's just a little bit too early still.
All right.
Does that help, or is there any,
I was just curious.
Yeah. Well, when construction is scheduled, we will be sending out notifications and so forth. We're trying to reach out to everybody, make sure everybody knows what's going on. I think for this this public outreach we're doing, we sent out like between 4,000 and 5,000 postcards just for notifications on this. So we're really doing our best to just make sure everybody knows that something is coming, and we'll continue to do that until this is all over and done with.
Thank you.
Great, thank you so much for your comment. Great. I'm going to hand it off to, we have one question from Lisa Miller. What are plans for managing displaced cars if the parking lanes are removed? These cars will just move to the residential streets. Will residences be provided a number of zone permits for parking and non-residents cars be monitored? Who would like to tackle that?
I can definitely tackle that. So as I noted during the presentation, we did conduct a utilization survey prior to the project kickoff and found that somewhere around 30%, I recall, of the available on-street parking was utilized. So I think, yeah, it can vary from day to day, but it's quite underutilized as a whole. So there's a lot of pavement out there that really isn't being put to work. And so I think this sort of project proposal does make better use of carving out space for other users on the roadway. But to answer your question, we anticipate retaining enough parking to accommodate the existing demand. Certainly it's possible that some cars would be displaced to local streets, but that is of course public parking as well. So it is viable for use by, you know, any others that are using the public street parking on Meridian. I would say that we do have existing RPZ criteria, and RPZ meaning restricted parking zones. That's typically imposed when there's a high parking trip generator, if you will, that is causing a burden to the surrounding neighborhood. And typically you see that around, you know, something like a light rail station. That's the kind of place where we would implement an RPZ. But certainly I've heard some feedback about, you know, the metro bus base or even the dump to some degree being a source of parking demand. And so if we found that that was the source of parking demand, which is something we study, we could certainly implement some measures to address that through RPZ. I will also note that we are planning for a true parking management program starting up kind of concurrent with the light rail station openings. And that will help to really address, you know, illegal parking or kind of disorganized parking, you know, that can occur when things get a little bit more crowded. And so I think that will help address some of those concerns as well. I think what tends to happen, especially if there aren't delineated curbs and sidewalks, is people can kind of maybe park a little too close to driveways or double park in some cases. And so that parking management program, I think, will help to mitigate some of the issues that might arise from a little bit more crowded parking than we experience today. But in general, I would just reiterate my comment that if you have a particular concern about your specific parking, please do reach out. We want to hear from you and understand that better, and work with you on potential solutions.
Great. Thank you so much, Kendra. All right. The next person I'd like to just raise their hands is John Valet. John, would you mind unmuting and share your comments with us?
Hey there. I was curious, we joined the call late, so it might have been discussed, but I was just curious if you could quickly touch on the considerations for pedestrian safety, including bike lanes and just expanding it for more pedestrian access rather than cars.
Yeah, I can tackle that. So this will kind of be a rehash for some of the folks who were on before, but in general, this grant is fairly targeted to improving a couple of specific crossings where we saw collisions occur, injury collisions for pedestrians. And so what we're proposing, and perhaps it would make sense, Veronica, if you could scroll back to 16030 then to that diagram to show, but you may be familiar with pedestrian activated flashing beacons. So we are planning that for the intersections of 163rd and then further supplementing the intersection of 170th up by the Early Learning Center with a median refuge and flashing beacons. And so 163rd and 170th are the primary targets for the pedestrian improvements. And then you can go to 163rd there, Veronica. And you can see that we're also going to be modifying the curb lines a little bit at 163rd, pushing the curb line out in order to reduce the overall pedestrian crossing distance and exposure, and also that improved sight lines. The other thing that I kind of mentioned, but didn't really talk about too much, was that the bike lanes can be helpful in some ways to both act as a buffer between the kind of active vehicle space, as well as really creating a little bit more sight distance. So it creates some space where, in practice, what drivers will do as they approach from a side street is they kind of stop at the stop line, let's say, and then they'll creep out to a point in which they can see. And so that bike lane space, when it's unoccupied, provides a little bit better opportunity for those sight lines to turn the corner and then not conflict with a pedestrian. And it also provides that buffer space for pedestrians as well for the active traffic on Meridian. Bike lanes, as well as lane width as a whole, can help to kind of slow drivers down too. Just the presence of bicyclists on the roadway can have that effect. What else did I miss? Let me think.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Has there been any discussion about reducing the 35-mile-per-hour speed limit to 30 miles per hour for also increased safety for pedestrians?
We did. It's already 30. We just did that in June.
I saw that it was on for all of Meridian Ave, or
Yes.
I noticed this section. Oh, awesome. Okay, maybe the signs haven't changed by our neighborhoods.
Oh, they should have. If they haven't, let me know where, because it definitely did go into effect on June 1st for the entire corridor. Yes. We'll be doing some follow-up studies pretty soon here, and then getting some educational enforcement out if there's any kind of discrepancies between what we're seeing and what we were expecting to see. So.
I personally am very happy you asked that, because I helped work on that project to help lower the speed.
Yeah, that's right,
That's
Veronica.
great.
That's awesome.
Right.
Thank you for all that you're doing.
Yeah.
Great, that's awesome. Thank you so much for your comment. That really made my day. It was great. All right, let's answer one of the questions in the question box. Let's go back and forth. So Bob Keller, at the bulb outs, how does a bike pass by, in the traffic lane or sidewalk?
I was just typing a response to that question.
Okay, go ahead, Sarah.
You can see here in the slide that Veronica has up, the bike lane actually is maintained through the intersection. The bulb out just removes the parking. So the bulb out is about 7 feet, and that's the width of the parking. So there's room for the bike lane to just continue through the intersection.
Okay, we'll flip to a person that, someone just forgot to raise their hand. Okay, if you want to raise your hand, you can as well. Let's go to another one. Chris Brummer, will parking shift from side to side of the street throughout the project, like 5th Avenue and Northeast?
Hi, Chris. It's been a long time since we've talked, but so 5th Avenue is a great reference point for kind of what we're talking about here. For this project, we chose not to kind of stagger the parking back and forth. It's feedback that if there's an interest in it in any particular location, I would certainly be willing to look at that, or the project team would be willing to look at that and consider how that could apply in certain segments. But in general, one of the things that we were trying to balance a little bit was that there's, you have the transfer station and the metro base on one side that really takes up a big swath of that east side that theoretically doesn't need as much parking. And so we were trying to then concentrate parking to the west side in that respect. So that was one of the choices that we made, understanding that kind of as you move south along the corridor, it kind of opens back up to more residential on the east side. But the other part of that too was there's a little bit less going on, less residences in general east of the corridor because you're sandwiched between the corridor and I-5. So that's kind of how that choice was made. And, you know, in general, we're trying to balance feedback we got on the Fifth Avenue project. I think in general that street is functioning quite nicely, but there was initially some, you know, concern about the staggered parking and the transitions back and forth, and even how that was navigatable, if that's a word, by bikes across those transitions. And so for that reason, we kind of try to keep it a little bit simpler. And I should also note the bog too. So you have a good half of the segment that along the east side didn't really make sense to retain parking. Does that, hopefully that answers the question, but I would love to hear your feedback if you have some.
Great. All right, let's go to a hand raised by Adrienne Dwarf. Would you like to speak? You just have to unmute yourself. Go ahead.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yep.
So I just had a quick question about those bulb outs that you talked about. I'm looking at these two slides where there's no parking on one side of the street. How does that work with the bulb out? Because it looks like it'd be sticking out into the bike lane. And I've had that as an issue like over on Alki where you're riding your bike along and then all of a sudden there's a bulb out and you would hit it if you went straight. You have to merge into where the cars are to get around that. So I'm wondering how that's going to work. Does that make sense?
Are you talking about the bulb out on 163rd?
Yes.
So there's not actually a bike lane on that street, so the bikes are already kind of in the flow of traffic. Whereas the bike lane on Meridian, the bulb out just cuts into the parking.
But the pictures before showed there might not be a parking lane. The two that were just up on the screen. So it's showing a 6-foot sidewalk and then a 5-foot bike lane. There's no parking. So how would that work with the bulb out?
There wouldn't be one in that location. So if we,
Okay.
The bulb outs would only apply in locations where there's on-street parking, but in locations where we'll be retaining the turn lane, there would be no bulb out.
Okay.
But instead, what we're doing, for example, at 170th, for that added pedestrian protection, if you will, would be to include a refuge island, a median refuge in the center of the roadway for the pedestrians on one side of the intersection. So yeah, to answer your question, yeah, there would be no bulb out if there is no parking.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you so much for your comment and question. Okay, we'll go back to another question in the chat box by an anonymous attendee. If you do keep on-street parking, will it just be, did I answer this one side, or are you planning on, we already answered this question?
I think we answered this in Chris's question. It's similar. Yep.
Correct. And then Lisa Miller has a follow-up question. Can anyone speak to how much is driven by the increased housing development and push for public transit use versus actual current use? I walk this segment of Meridian twice a day, morning, evening hours, and have not seen more than 20 bikes in the last 8 months.
Yes, I love this question. So I would say, you know, it all fits together. I wouldn't say that the public transit use per se, or any of the sort of growth that's happening in the sub areas around the light rail stations is what's driving this. What is driving this specific project, meaning the safety improvements for pedestrians specifically, is the collision history, and the grant that we received is specifically targeted toward that, and to kind of increase safety of other users on the roadway, like bicyclists. Particularly, the grant focuses on vulnerable roadway users. And so that's what the grant is driven to do. What I mentioned earlier in the presentation is we are guided by our long range plans. And for roadways, that means our transportation master plan. Our transportation master plan was adopted in 2011 and slated bike lanes for this corridor. And that really was part of a big vision to connect lots of important networks for bicyclists to key destinations like light rail stations, or like retail or schools or parks and that sort of thing. I would highly agree that we wouldn't expect to see a ton of bikes on Meridian today because there are no bike lanes. It's a, if you build it, they will come kind of scenario. That's not to say that we're going to see massive hordes of bikes the second we put bike lanes on Meridian, but we do want to provide those options. And as our city grows, we are hoping, and our vision is for all of the new residents that we're going to be bringing to our city as part of the growth and redevelopment around the light rail stations, that some of those folks will choose to use bikes to access the light rail stations instead of driving. And really our transportation plan throughout the city banks on that. It really depends on people using modes other than cars to get around. So it is a really key and important aspect of our long range vision for our city, given that we are growing rapidly and we have to accommodate that growth. It is part of, part of our mission here. We're in a region that is growing, so we have to figure out how to accommodate that in a way that makes sense. But I would say that on on the corridors that we have implemented, quality bike facilities, we have certainly seen an uptick in bike use, and perhaps somebody else on this meeting could vet that, but I would fully expect it to be an if you build it, they will come kind of scenario for sure.
Great, thank you so much. All right, we have another question from an anonymous attendee saying, how narrow is 163rd going to be along Meridian, which is at this location here. The photo on slide 11, it looks very narrow. Sarah, how wide do you think 163rd is going to be?
So on the south end here, it's shown as that's 22 feet wide. It may look a little confusing because we are showing the gutter here. So the outermost line is actually part of the roadway. You can drive on it, it's part of the lane width. Mm-hmm.
And I'll just supplement by saying that 22 feet is a very typical kind of two-way travel lane width. A lot of our streets in Shoreline were built to kind of old county standards. They were very car-centric, as you can see as you travel through the city, where there's no sidewalks on most of our streets and there's very wide pavement swaths. These narrowed intersection throats in particular really help to decrease pedestrian collision occurrence because it reduces their exposure while they're crossing. It reduces driver turning speed, so you can't whip around those corners so fast. And it organizes traffic better as a whole. So it does a lot of great things when we can kind of tighten up those spaces. It does mean that you might have to adapt a little bit if there's a very large vehicle, but that doesn't happen, a significant amount of the time. And so to the degree we can, especially at these local street intersections, we want to prioritize the pedestrian movements to avoid those kinds of collisions.
Great, thank you so much. All right, and then a new comment from Barbara K. Are there any considerations for pedestrian improvements like a crosswalk for 160th?
I can answer that question. So the grant focused on the locations where we had collision history primarily, which was at 163rd and 170th. And additionally, I think those locations have some higher pedestrian use with association to the transit center, the transfer station, bus stops, and then at 170th, the early learning center, of course. In terms of 160th, I'd love to improve all these intersections. I'd love to bulb them out to the degree possible or provide refuges to the degree possible, but the grant scope is fairly limited. In terms of crosswalk markings alone, that's a trickier subject. Crosswalk markings, and this might be a little bit counterintuitive or surprising, but crosswalk markings alone do really nothing to improve safety outcomes. What they do is they do to some degree increase driver yield rates, which can be good, but they can also cause a false sense of security in some cases. And there's study after study showing that when you install marked crosswalks with nothing else, and when it's used somewhat indiscriminately to mark the legal crossing, it can actually increase collisions, and particularly that relates to older pedestrians and younger pedestrians. And so we definitely don't want to mark crosswalks, somewhat indiscriminately. I'd be willing to certainly take a look at it, but what I'd prefer, from a city traffic engineering perspective, is that folks use the supplemented crossing at 163rd to the degree possible. I know that's not always possible, but especially for those younger users, we really do want to highlight those crossings that we are increasing safety at in terms of those pedestrian activated flashing beacons and the bulb outs that we're doing at 163rd. So hopefully that answers your question. I would love that if every crossing was supplemented, in terms of having all of the features that made it feel safer for folks, but the constraints of this grant really limit it to the 2 locations we're focusing on.
Great. Awesome. The next question by Paul M. I joined late, so I might have missed this. At the pedestrian crossings that will be improved, did you consider making them continuous sidewalks, as in the pedestrian crossing stays at level with the sidewalk, or rather than dipping to the level of the road with ramps at each curve?
Yeah, I can answer that one too. And yeah, I'm sorry, I'm just trying to look up the question Lisa is also asking. But to answer your question in terms of, so I'm trying to read the text here if I can. In terms of dipping down versus staying up, and that what the term for what I think you're describing is a raised crosswalk. We did not consider that for Meridian. Our city is just starting to dabble in raised crosswalks, I would say. But for a corridor like Meridian Avenue, I think that would probably not be a good fit based on its classification, based on the amount of traffic it handles on a given day. And really key is that it's an emergency vehicle route, a very important one, in fact, and serves transit and other large vehicles, including the school, to the northwest. So, for all of those reasons, having a raised crossing within, across Meridian itself, that was not considered. And we generally wouldn't consider that for this level of arterial that we're talking about. In terms of the side streets, that's another question. I think that becomes a tricky one as well. Especially at intersections like this, it becomes difficult to create a raised crossing where at an uncontrolled intersection, if you will. So at an intersection like 163rd, if we were to keep the 163rd leg raised, that creates a slowdown for the folks that are turning from southbound to a southbound left turn, for example, to 163rd. And we don't want to put them in a vulnerable position of being kind of stopped or slowed while they're making that turn in front of active traffic. So usually, if you're going to use a raised crosswalk in an intersection scenario, it would be under a controlled, maybe always stop, or potentially some kind of beacon or signalized situation where everybody's sort of yielding at some point, as opposed to this more uncontrolled movement. So for various reasons, it didn't make sense for this project, but it is something we are starting to do and hope to do a little bit more of in applications where it makes sense. The next place we'll be doing this is doing a raised crossing, I should say, is on 20th Avenue Northwest near Richmond Beach Saltwater Park. So you can look out for one there.
Great, thank you so much for your comment. All right, we have another comment. I might have missed this, but will the bike lanes be protected? And will the bike lanes have sensors for the traffic lights at intersections? Thank you.
And I can handle this one, Sarah, or you can. Southbound, we are planning for a buffered bike lane for now. So that is it's a striped bike lane. So far we have, and I'm sorry, a striped buffer, meaning just an additional, I think is it 2 feet, Sarah? Is that correct? That provides just a little bit of extra width for the bicyclist and a little bit more visual delineation between those two modes. We have not so far as a city opted very often to use things like delineator posts, which you may see a lot of in Seattle. They're a very high maintenance burden. And we just haven't found a strong correlation between their ability to prevent collisions. But in the future, as particularly if there are large scale capital projects or redevelopment projects that occur, there's potentially some opportunity there to kind of to strengthen that buffer potentially. But right now it's just a striped buffer in the southbound direction. In the northbound direction, it will be just a striped bike lane for now, is what we're planning for.
Great. All right. The next, I'm going to go back up.
Oh, the detection. I didn't answer the detection.
Oh, yes. Go ahead.
Sorry. So at 175th and Meridian, I would encourage you to check out our project website that Leif, again, is project managing. There, at that intersection, we have plans for a sort of, if you're familiar with the terminology, a protected intersection for bicyclists. But essentially what we're doing is we're kind of funneling bicyclists and pedestrians into a large waiting area to utilize pedestrian push buttons, which functions, quite well in terms of actually being consistent at serving those movements. And it is more protected for an all ages and abilities function, which is especially important given the school there and given 175th's important centralized location in our city. To the south at 155th, we do have some video detection. I understand it is not perfect, but given that, we certainly think, bicycle detection is an important component of a functional bike facility, and it's also a law. If there's a specific movement that you have an interest in seeing detection increased or improved or just included, please do let me know, and we will look at that as early as next week. There are things we can do with the detection there to help those bicycle movements if they're not being served. This would be the first I've heard of it at 155th and Meridian being an issue. So please do contact us and let us know. Thank you.
Great. Thank you very much for your comment. All right, we got another one from Dennis Lynn. During heavy traffic, folks create their own right-hand turn lane from 170th to 175th northbound. Anything being done to curb this?
So we're talking about early learning center, and it's, I think what I'm hearing is on 170th, heading eastbound, presumably, to Meridian, a sort of pseudo right turn lane is created. Is that, if that's what I'm hearing? So we don't have any specific plans to address traffic operations on eastbound 170th. It's something that I'm interested in. I don't think I've seen that specifically. And I'm not sure if it's inherently a bad thing or if you're asking if it can be formalized in terms of channelization. So that's something I can certainly look at. Since school's back in session now, it should be easy enough to do. And so we will have some staff go out and take a look at that. I was not aware that that was happening, but I'm also not surprised because the school areas tend to be quite a zoo, as I have experienced with my own son during those drop off and pickup times. So we'll take a look at that.
Great, thank you. Just like to keep in mind, everyone, we have about 10 more minutes within our 1 hour. So if you want to raise your hand and get your questions in, go right ahead. So far, I've only seen a couple more. Lisa Miller, follow up on this. Collision history data is 6 to 12 years old. What are current incidents?
Yeah, I haven't dug into the collision data for this year's annual traffic report yet. So I'm not sure is my answer to your question, but I think we do know that 170th is an important corridor, or sorry, an important intersection in terms of crossing school children. So it's an area that preventatively speaking would be a good one to focus on enhancing from the pedestrian refuge perspective. I'm not sure south of there what we are looking at in terms of the pedestrian collision history. I don't recall hearing about anything over the last several years, which is a good thing. But these pedestrian collisions that have occurred there to date, I think, are still warranting being addressed. And certainly as our city grows with the traffic volumes and hopefully more people on foot and on bike, that'll be an important consideration too. But I'm not sure is my answer to your question.
Let's see. Barbara K, I think we did answer your question. Is Lisa also another one? Let's see. I think that so far that's everyone's. Oh, Mark Brown. He's not talking about on 170th. He means northbound on Meridian from 170th to 175th. Road widens and people move right and eastbound. Okay.
I see. Thank you for that clarification. And I would say if you check out our 175th and Meridian project, you can see, I think like there's a concept shown for how that's planned to be organized in the northbound direction.
Yeah, definitely. If you visit our project website, you can take a look at that. I think it's also worth noting that the 175th project is going to be putting shared use path and buffered bike lanes up there as well. So this project kind of feathers into all that, as well as future projects. You know, if you dig into the transportation master plan, you know, north of this on Meridian, you know, the goal is to have long corridors of continuous bike lanes so we can move people around really well.
Okay, I put the project website into the chat box if anybody is curious. These are the plans. You can see my screen. Okay. All right. Oh, Hassan's got another question. There are a lot of commercial vehicles that park on Meridian outside of the electric station. This causes a lot of blind spots. Is there anything that can be done here?
Yeah, in general, the project, and this, we didn't go into this level of detail, but we are looking at, you know, basically at a widespread basis, making sure that we scale or specifically sign for where parking can and cannot occur, and making sure that the parking is pulled back from the intersections enough to make sure that the sight lines are preserved. And certainly familiar with some of that commercial vehicle parking that occurs, you know, to some degree on the east side, but also just along the corridor in general. So that is, the sightline consideration is something that is important throughout the project and is something that we'll be evaluating for parking restrictions specifically. I also wanted to address, there was a question, will you also add bike lanes on Meridian south of 155th and north of 175th? Without continuous bike lanes, cyclists will be less likely to bike on Meridian. And the answer to that is yes. Our bike plan does plan for bike lanes or bike facilities along Meridian for the entire duration of the corridor. So that means from 145th all the way up to 205th. The timing for those is to some degree unknown. I think as you head south along the corridor, it's likely some of the redevelopment activity might contribute to some of that bike lane construction or provision. And then similarly, as you head north along the corridor, that is the case as well. We do have some prospective grants that would fill in between basically where the 175th Meridian project leaves off and where up to essentially the interurban trail connection up at 200. So that is on the horizon, and if we're lucky, we might be able to accomplish that over the next 4 years or so.
Great, awesome. Are there any other questions? Anyone to raise their hand? I think we've addressed all of them so far in the comment box. If not,
There
please
was
raise your
one
hand.
also that I typed the response to, so I just want to make sure that got addressed. There's a question about sightlines on 165th, especially when turning out of the transfer station and making a left. And right now the plan shows removal of parking on that northbound side, so that's going to significantly improve sight distance at that intersection.
Great, thank you. Okay, any more raised hands or questions you want to put in? I'll give you another few minutes. Oh, here's another one from Marita Rabbit. I drive Meridian every day and I have not seen a bike on Meridian. Can you explain why you think building it will help the car flow?
Why do we think that building bike lanes would help the car flow, if that's the question that I'm understanding? For multiple reasons. So again, I would not expect to see a lot of bikes on Meridian today because there are no bike facilities and it's quite uncomfortable to ride there. But in the future, it will serve, and it does serve today as a very important network connecting to key destinations in Shoreline, including transit, the light rail stations, et cetera, in terms of kind of cross-connecting corridors like 185th, which has existing bike facilities, for example, 155th does as well. And so when we're going to grow by, you know, a significant amount of population over the next 20 years, our hope is in these denser areas that we can encourage folks to use other modes like bicycles and like, you know, walking, or even to some degree, you know, electric bikes and shared scooters and that sort of thing to get around. And so what it does, what building the bike lanes does, is it provides that opportunity for options. When we are expecting to see increased delay, we are expecting to see increased growth, we are expecting your travel times to take longer, you know, in 5 years from now. And so what bike lanes do is they help provide an option to sitting in traffic, and they help take people off the roadway that would otherwise be blocking you if you're in a car. So in that way, they do a lot to help both the environment and travel times for people that are in cars. So hopefully that answers the question to some degree.
Thank you so much. All right, thank you so much for your comment, Marita. All right, Andy Mayberry, I am going to unmute you. If you could unmute yourself and then like to share anything, go right ahead.
Yes, I would like to address the people that don't see bicycles on Meridian. I live right on 170th and Meridian on the west side. I ride Meridian every single day. And the reason you don't see bicycles on Meridian, especially me, is once I get to 160th or 170th, I get the heck off of Meridian because it is not a safe road to ride bicycles on at this time, period. And I will not ride on Meridian at this time. So there is a need, a big need for the bicycle lanes. Thank you.
Thank you, Andy. I really appreciate it for coming out tonight. And I hope you got that postcard, and I'm so glad to see you tonight. But thank you for sharing your comment. Okay, great. I'm going to give it another minute or so if there's any last comments. Oh, Lisa's got an extra comment. Precisely, it seems like, well, we'll see. She has more to say. And then, Lisa, if you want to unmute yourself, you want to raise your hand, you can feel free to chat and give them a couple minutes. Anyone else want to raise their hand, ask any last minute comments?
I don't understand. How are you going to get?
Anyone else? Okay, great. Well, I think that'll wrap it up for tonight. I want to thank everyone on behalf of City of Shoreline and Sarah and everyone, for all the attendees for attending tonight. Please go on to the project website. We really encourage you to provide all your comments there as well on the Social Pinpoint site. But yeah, we're closing on October 1st, so please get in as many comments and questions, and we do want your feedback on the survey for the different options and alternatives. Yeah, but we will post this particular recording and any of the frequently asked questions onto the project website in due course. But on behalf of the City of Shoreline, we really want to thank you for spending your afternoon with us, and hope you have a jolly good evening. And hope you learned something today.
I have one last plug here before we end this. So, and I don't know if this got mentioned or not. I apologize if it did. But on our project website, if you go down to the bottom, there's a community demographic information survey that we would ask you to fill out if you have a minute or two. It helps us report to, essentially we report to the feds, and then we go after grants and stuff, and this helps us with our reporting efforts to know who we're reaching. And if you could fill that out, we'd appreciate it, and it'll be used. So thank you.
Great, thank you so much. I have different project updates as well. I highly recommend you check it out. And then the link to Social Pinpoint is right up top. Thank you everyone for your wonderful night. Hope you learned something, hope you had a great time, and all the contact information is also in the chat box and on the website here on the right-hand side. Have a great evening and take care. Stay safe, everyone. Have a good night.
Thank you.